or comparable experiences it might be.
Observation on the fabric heat loss. So thermal camera images are very sexy things, but actually they're no use unless you know exactly what's happening behind each of the walls in that building. And the attachment, you go around the street and you think, oh, that's where the camera's fine, because there's a huge thermal heat loss. So any observations, and did you look to correct when you did that?
Yes, I think that's a very good point. Because when we use thermal images, we have to be very careful that it's actually imagination more than imaging. Because if you set the setting wrong, you can get very different kind of losses. The houses we looked at, they are Group A houses, so we know what's happening inside as well. And all our, or most of our researchers are qualified into using thermal imaging cameras. And I would say when communities start to do that, because it does make energy use visible, please be very careful in how it's used. And I think working with universities is actually very good, or local universities, because it can bring that kind of rigor that you're saying. So yes, we know what's happening and we're very careful about it.
Yeah, just a comment, not only should one be careful about language usage, but also acronyms. LEAF, Linking Environment, Agriculture and Farming, has been in formation for many years. I think Mark will agree with me on those.
It was great to hear you talk about the process of communication, and my ears picked up when I heard you talk about visibility. We saw a few different visualizations, what could be called visualizations in terms of graphs and maps. My question is, do you think there's enough emphasis being placed on the visualization of energy data? And do you think that using money as an alternative unit of measurement is adequate or really desirable?
I mean, I can pick up on. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the using money aspect first, I mean, I absolutely see where you're coming from when you say it's limited. In fact, probably our principal investigator, Andy Dobson, he's not here today, but he's actually written things about how when you start making things about money, then you're kind of limiting the motivation, I suppose, and how far people might go to take, low carbon solutions. So there is a tension there. I'm not saying I know what the answer is. So you've got the tension between money being something people might understand. Visibility, that's probably some way of making something like kilowatt hours more tangible. You're absolutely right. I mean, we didn't talk about it today, but we also used energy monitors in our project, and one of the things people were saying at the focus groups as well was how the energy monitors did kind of enable them to see their consumption in relative terms, even when using measurements like kilowatt hours, and especially when they started comparing that to the other householders, they then kind of had an idea of what the average was, what was kind of a normal amount, I suppose. So I think maybe something like that is something that has to happen, because kilowatt hours by itself, I mean, people might say, well, I use 12 kilowatt hours a day, what's that? What does that mean? Once you've kind of got that visibility and you can also compare to other people and you can see where you are on the scale, I think that there may be opportunities there that you can move beyond money.
Yes, in our project, visualization is key. So we've used mapping as a way of communicating energy-related information. So we actually don't talk about numbers at all. We use colors. So and those maps are on. You could use Google Earth or.
Can I just follow up on that question? Just think about representational correspondence.
Yes.
Visualization is a broader notion than graphs and maps.
Yes.
I just want to ask Carol, when you were talking about brokers of change, I just wondered, did you consider the Bristol project about the role of local authority members in that broker between the Community Energy Group, local government and central government?
Members as in elected members, as opposed to officers. I think the answer is no, actually. Elected members didn't really feature in our thinking. We did work with council officers and we were talking to them to find out the sorts of things that they were doing. And obviously the council has a role, potentially, in working with the community groups and making it relevant at a local level. But no, we didn't talk about members particularly.
I have some experience of working with local, or trying to work with local authority members in other projects, and I have to be honest, I found it quite difficult to engage them. I mean, I suppose in terms of responding meaningfully at community level, you need somebody who's largely in the sort of same headspace that we're in. And I found actually trying to work with parish councils or locally elected members actually quite a difficult thing to do. In some cases they've actually been very it's on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes they are actually quite good and have been very supportive and have opened opportunities, but generally speaking I still find it quite frustrating at the moment.
Can I just make one comment? I think it's quite interesting because I work with South Gloucestershire Council. I would say the biggest drivers of change at the local level are parish councillors or the ward councillors. They're the ones that want to make the community action happen. So they're pushing that.
I'd say that's not really the case in Bristol.
Well, within the strategy development process, local neighbourhood partnerships came up quite strongly, which is almost getting to that as people that groups need to work more closely with in the future.
I think it's a big opportunity.
We had a minute.
Yes, following on the questions about visualisation and comparison, it seems like it's quite powerful for people to compare their own message to someone else's. There's also a kind of confidentiality or data protection side to that, and I was wondering if any of those studies are trying to actually make public the usage of every individual house and how you deal with consent or agreement to share that information.
Yes, I think I can answer that. That does come up. For the groups that we are working with, we've got consent from them. But on a LEAF project actually, we use carbon mapping for every house within about 374 houses and made it public through 6 public workshops. Interestingly, none of the householders, and we were having workshops in the area we were mapping, it was model consumption of course. None of the householders who came to the workshop had a problem with it. They actually were helping us in improving the rating of that house or the energy consumption, because they said actually it's not red. We've got PVs at the back of the house which you may not have noticed. So there's actually, we were actually testing that kind of a hypothesis, and we didn't get even one householder to say that why are you showing my house? It had another effect. Somehow I find maps have a very positive effect on people.
I can just pick up on that very quickly as well. So in our project, we didn't make anyone's energy consumption public, if you mean open to anyone. We did do some individual feedback to every household where we sent them a letter using the EDM data and the graphs, explaining what we could kind of read from their consumption patterns and then comparing it to a couple of other similar households. But we anonymised as well, so we didn't sort of say this is whoever lives at which address. We just sort of said this is a similar household to you, similar circumstances, and this is what they're using. So we didn't really come across those issues, I suppose.
It sounds like you've got 2 quite different approaches to that, and I'd be interested in what the comparison between them is. Does that actually make a difference to people's behaviour, whether they see the detail of?
Well, I can tell you the difference that the map made. People in that neighborhood had 42 houses signed up to install, energy efficiency measures as a result. So I think that's quite a point. 126 householders attended, 42 actually took up the measure.
So the map was just the whole house. It wasn't electricity.
No, it was everything. You could break it down even to water. So you can break it down to space heating, hot water usage. But the benefit of that was that people got engaged with what was happening, because we weren't showing numbers; the numbers were behind it.
Right.
So I can say that was a one.
Was the colours. I've got Martin and then.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Martin Fodor, part of Bristol Energy Network. It's really a question about the equity and distributional issues that are underlying this but haven't been discussed, because these are projects in something called low carbon communities. Obviously all of these, and that's probably a different bit of government funding it than the bit concerned with fuel poverty. But there was a comment made about people taking advantage of equipment or learning to use more energy. That could be quite legitimate if we assume that the fuel rich are the ones using most carbon and the fuel poor don't have enough money to use as much carbon or energy, or to get the energy services. That's what we're actually usually after. We're usually after services from energy, like walls or equipment or stuff in our houses or lives. And unless you were targeting the people using the most and expecting to get them to use less, it might be quite legitimate, arguably, in terms of equity, to say, if you've not got enough money but we're helping you be more efficient, you can now use more to get your share. And I don't hear any of that discussed in what's been described up to now. I just challenge the researchers to say, were you interested in whether people had a fair share at the start, or was that irrelevant? You only just wanted to push everyone to use down of carbon or energy.
I mean, you come in a sec, Simon, but yeah, I mean, actually, we've had this discussion looking at our project title now. We call it Reducing Energy Consumption. And yeah, we're talking, well, really, we should call it maybe increasing energy efficiency.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we didn't present it because you can't present everything and you can't talk about everything when you do your research. But yes, we have at least discussed about these kind of equity and justice issues. And I mean, in some of the households we've studied are absolutely low-income households, you might describe them. And yeah, it's not necessarily for those people reducing their consumption even further. It's actually, as you say, about increasing efficiency and making sure that they get their fair share. Do you want to pick up on something as well, Simon?
I suppose the nature of what we were interested in was perhaps more about knowledge networks and how information flows around the community. The other point perhaps on the 55 houses that we work with, there was no sense of trying to go with some who were sort of fuel rich and some who were fuel poor. It was really on a self-selection process. We really wanted people who were prepared to work with us. So there wasn't really any selection of that sort of difference that you're talking about, and we were just happy to take people from the communities who said yes, we'd be interested in being part of that project. So yeah.
Yes, just to add, again, there wasn't enough time to talk about it, but we do have 2 communities which have quite fuel poor households, and we're looking at that in detail. You know, when I mentioned that there was an increase in energy use, it was not for those houses. It was for the, you know, we've also got very affluent houses as well, with a lot of kit. And we would, of course, welcome a little bit of increase, and we will find that out. It's not very difficult because we've got, you know, at least 36 houses like those. So we should be able to find that out quite easily. But that comment wasn't meant for fuel poor. It was for, just to give you an idea, one of the houses is using 88,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. Just to put it in context, above 73,000 kilowatt hours, your property effectively becomes non-domestic, according to Valuation Office. And the reason is that house has got 3 heat pumps, which are not working properly. So they didn't, and this is a rich household, so anyway, I can talk to you over lunch.
I wanted to just collect up Fiona Rowe, Bridget, and 2 more in the back row here. Yeah, I know.
I was actually particularly asked 2 questions. There are different people. One was with Simon Neal's study. I was really interested in whether you saw an impact, that social norm impact, with the idea that one of the big things that changes people's behaviour is that they think other people are doing something and they should do it too. And then that came out to the study.
Yeah, I mean, actually, probably one of the weaknesses of our study is that because it's so short term compared to, say, Raj's, and we are a smaller team, in terms of measuring the tangible impact, it's much more difficult for us to do that because we're only going to have 1 year of EDM data. So you can weather correct it, I suppose, but as Raj says, there's kind of issues that come out of that as well. So we can only really go off what people are telling us, but I can tell you that, you know, we've had at least a few participants that have talked about kind of changing their household routines in quite sort of significant ways. So just to give you one example, we had one lady who said that she no longer sort of ironed and things while she had the telly on, or she no longer tried to do 2 things at once. So, for example, did her washing or while she was watching the telly, because she'd end up just kind of, I can't remember what her reasoning was, but sorry, but yeah, basically it wasn't that she was just trying to reduce the peak, but also probably the fact that when she was watching telly she'd become distracted, so she'd just kind of leave the iron and not actually do the ironing and just sit down and watch telly for 15 minutes with the iron on and things like that. So she was actually kind of making some sort of fundamental changes to sort of her habits and routines and how she did things, not just sort of, I don't know, small things. So yeah.
Yes and no to some extent, because it's a knowledge exchange, it's a high-funded knowledge exchange project. So they will be talking about some of the materials that have been created through Everlock. But to what extent, you know, we're still deciding because we need to get some permissions from communities as well. So yes, that is a knowledge exchange next step of this. So yeah, you're right. It's next week, next Saturday. Yeah.
Is the monetary evaluation
Yes, it's for self-evaluation.
The person at the back. You,
Question for Simon and Neil. I thought you were very brave, especially as a community, to adopt this model, deficit model of public understanding of science.
Yeah.
I think is where you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where we're coming from. Yeah.
Very refreshing. And I'm just wondering if you're actually pushing that to its extreme, or in the sense that are you adopting or challenging behavioural model of change, consumptive patterns, or are you going beyond that, or looking at other ways of thinking about day-to-day patterns of consumption of energy? It seems that from literature, that's been challenged now to adopt this way to understand, or a way to bring about change.
The social practice model.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not adopting social practice theory, but I think you're certainly right. I think our research is kind of resonating with that. We're using kind of the deficit model that came from the 90s, Brian Wynne, people like that, as kind of the foregrounding for what we're doing, I suppose. And when we're kind of discussing our alternatives, we're not really using social practice theory, but I think it certainly resonates, especially the things like comparing everyday conventions and taking for granted habits. So, yeah, happy to talk a bit more about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and maybe the last one before that.
So I've got a question for Rajat.
Yeah.
It's a very technical question, and it relates to the potential definition of quantitative goals of how much energy efficiency could be increased by certain measures in refurbishment or by changing behavior. And I imagine that it should be very useful if one could estimate the savings in energy consumption of gas and electricity from refurbishment or from behavior change. But we also saw in the presentation that in Group A there's a great variety of energy consumption levels. Have you done an analysis of what the underlying factors were that contributed to this variety? That's my first question.
Yeah.
And secondly, are you aware of, or what's your personal opinion, such maybe archetypes or profiles could be created that give a rule of thumb estimate for the quantitative savings from refurbishment to a certain building or from behavior change? And that can then tie back into the visualization. That could be monetary, or it could be a percentage on the path towards the ideal goal.
Okay. I am an architect by qualification. I should have probably said that. So I understand about refurbishment and building quite well, having refurbished a few houses, under different TSP programs. Your first question about Group A is that yes, there is a lot of variety. The reason is because of the nature of households with higher socioeconomic status. We wanted to go for houses which had physical interventions done to their houses. And remember, the communities were not paying for 100% of those, maybe 50%. So these houses were large, quite rich households with 2 heat pumps, couple of PV systems, and solid wall insulation done. Because we want to look at what is actually happening in practice. Remember, there's a serious lack of evidence base in this. The government does not know what the U value of a solid wall insulation is. What is assumed is wrong, and there is a study going on to estimate that. So there are separate things which we will look at, in other programs. So yes, there is a variety, and that research is ongoing. Give us a few months, you'll have all the answers to why that happened. In terms of, I think you have a very good point about behavior change and technical interventions. What I tend to now promote is, and this is my personal opinion, is don't start with technical interventions at all. Actually start with engaging the householder first. Because if you have them involved, then the technical interventions will actually work. And there are examples of that. Let's say you improve a boiler and then have a condensing boiler or something else. If the control system of that boiler is not usable, it's not going to work. Like we found that people were using thermostats as a way of switching on and off the heating system. So when they heard the click, they would turn the thermostat on. And that could be at 26 degrees as well because of the weather that we have nowadays. So there's a complete lack of knowledge in terms of the control interfaces of these systems. And that's where behavior change occurs. Some has been quantified. Work has shown that if you have, for instance, energy displays in people's houses, it could save up to 5%. There is lack of research in actually looking at it over 3 to 5 years. It's more over 6 months or a year. But both are interrelated. I wouldn't separate the two because a house is slightly different from other things, or a building is slightly different. It's very socio-psycho-technical, I would say. But I think your point is important.
I think we'll, I like the idea of psychotechnical. I have not come across that.
Socio-technical.
I think we're going to break for lunch now. Thank you very much to all the speakers. We'll hear more after lunch, and thanks.